God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you all enjoyed your long weekend. I do apologize for missing Friday's video. I had intended on getting that out, but I hadn't made any provisions to do an early upload. I had only planned on recording and uploading on Friday, and that ended up not panning out. So, we're back here on Tuesday. Thank you for your patience and for joining me today. Of course, the biggest news story of the day is Bret Kavenaugh's Supreme Court confirmation hearing that began today. It almost didn't begin, though. The confirmation hearings of Supreme Court justices are supposed to begin with the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman making some opening remarks. And we're going to skip down to that. We'll come back to some of these things that are at the top of the story here. But let me just show you some of what began. Earlier Tuesday, this would be early in the confirmation process, protests from Democratic lawmakers and demonstrators delayed the formal start of proceedings by more than an hour. Within moments of Tuesday's confirmation hearing kickoff, top Democrats tried to sideline the session with a rapid-fire string of objections concerning access to the nominees' records. When Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley first tried to deliver the opening remarks, Democratic California Senator Kamala Harris raised objections to the committee receiving a batch of 42,000 documents relating to the nominees' work with past administrations. "We cannot possibly move forward," said Harris. Grassley told her she was out of order, but other Democrats chimed in to back up Harris, included Senator Richard Blumenthal, who moved to adjourn. And it wasn't just like shortly into Grassley's statements. This was it within the first sentence. Like Chuck Grassley opens his mouth, says 5 words, and Kamala Harris says, "Senator, I object," or pretty much. She's trying to interject this question, this objection, and Grassley says, "You're out of order, so I'm going to move on." And then within a few more words, Richard Blumenthal says, "Senator, or Mr. Chairman, if you won't hear us, I move to adjourn." And the room bursts into applause. It was almost like watching a circus, and that's just the clip that I got to see. I'm sure there's a lot more footage that is available. This prompted applause from some of the audience and touched off protests and shouting. Then, after New Jersey Senator Cory Booker added his voice, complaining of a rush, Grassley countered, "I think you're taking advantage of my decency and integrity." The chaos led Republican Senator John Cornyn to remark, "This is the first confirmation hearing subject to mob rule." The Texas senator suggested Democrats would be held in contempt of court if they behaved that way in a court of law. More than an hour and 15 minutes after the hearing began, Grassley moved past Democratic attempts to delay and finally delivered his opening statement. Over the sustained shouts of protesters who are being escorted out of the room. "Judge Kavenaugh is one of the most qualified nominees, if not the most qualified nominee I have seen," Grassley said. The disruptions continued as lawmakers attempted to make opening statements. There were 63 interruptions before the break for lunch. Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch struggled to deliver his prepared remarks as protesters audibly shouted over him, "I think we ought to have this loudmouth removed," a frustrated Hatch said. "We shouldn't have to put up with this kind of stuff." Grassley acknowledged that it was one of the most unruly openings of any Supreme Court hearing, saying, "This is something I've never gone through before in 15 Supreme Court nominations." Now, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin defended the outbursts. And you might remember Senator Durbin as the guy that made up the S-hole comment about President Trump suggesting that countries that some people were trying to immigrate from are not good places to live. No evidence, to my knowledge, ever emerged of Trump saying, "Why do you want to have people from these S-hole countries?" And yet, this is something that Dick Durbin stridently argued was that the president had in fact said. This is the guy that said, "What we've heard is the noise of democracy. This is what happens in a free country when people can stand up and speak and not be jailed, imprisoned, tortured, or killed because of it." I wonder if Senator Durbin would have this same thing to say if people were interrupting his Supreme Court picks nomination and confirmation hearing. I wonder if conservatives had raised this much noise about Elena Kagan. You know, as a brief aside, there's been a lot of comparisons between Kavanaugh's nomination and Elena Kagan's nomination. And I wonder if Dick Durbin would have these same things to say if conservatives had interrupted Elena Kagan's nomination. I really doubt it. Kavanaugh has left one of the longest paper trails of any recent Supreme Court nominee, having served for more than a decade on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and before that for 5 years as a lawyer in the White House counsel's office in the George Bush administration. He also worked for independent counsel Ken Starr for 3 years during the probe that led to the impeachment of former President Bill Clinton. Cory Booker, he voiced one objection during the opening statements. He pleaded to delay the vote until more documents are released. We should not vote now, Booker said. We should wait, and if we're not waiting, we should object to your nomination. Democrats have already seen thousands of these documents, but they say they want time to review and seek more. Dick Durbin said, if you trust the American people, they will trust you, but if your effort today continues to conceal and hide documents, it raises a suspicion. He said this specifically to Judge Kavanaugh. Democrats have specifically raised objections over how the Senate received 42,000 pages of documents the night before the confirmation hearing began. Senator Patrick Leahy, the only Democrat senator to ever be elected from Vermont, I've been told, said this is the most incomplete, most partisan, least transparent vetting of any Supreme Court nominee I've ever seen. Now, I was listening to the Ben Shapiro show today, and he pointed out something that I thought was interesting, how the Supreme Court nominee never actually answers questions concerning policy. This is according to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg doctrine. And there's a clip that it was either he or Andrew Klavan showed on their shows today of Ginsburg saying, you're not allowed to ask me about how I would vote on specific cases because I'm supposed to be impartial. I'm supposed to decide these things on a case-by-case basis. And then, of course, she went on to be the most liberal Supreme Court justice to ever sit on the Supreme Court. And this is something that Ben Shapiro spoke to on his show today. He said, you know, we talk about these people, we talk about Supreme Court justices and the way that they're going to vote, and we hope, and especially when Democrats nominate their Supreme Court justices, Republicans talk about the ways that they're going to vote, the dangerous things that they're going to do, and how they're going to undermine the Constitution, and then they vote for them to sit on the Supreme Court because they're not allowed to ask those questions in the confirmation hearing, and then they go to the Supreme Court and they do all of the things that we were told that they were going to do. That is, by Republicans and conservative commentators. When it comes to Kavanaugh, we're having more of a dog and pony show than we've had on past nominees. You know, Kavanaugh and the previous Trump nominee, Neil Gorsuch, both have made statements that they're going to uphold the Constitution, that they're going to vote according to precedent and according to constitutional law, and the Democrats continue to want to make this about their own pet policies. They want to know if Kavanaugh is going to pursue the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and they want to know that if Roe versus Wade does come up to be contested, if Kavanaugh is going to vote to overturn it. And they want to have that on record because they want to be able to scare the liberal Republican senators away from voting for Kavanaugh. Let's continue reading. Grassley, in a written statement submitted for the record on Tuesday, accused Democrats of trying to bury this committee in millions of pages of irrelevant paperwork. He called out California Senator Dianne Feinstein, the committee's ranking member, for wanting to search the emails of every Bush White House aide for Kavanaugh documents. This would have taken months and months to complete, Grassley said. As I have repeatedly stated, I'm not going to put the American taxpayers on the hook for the Democrats' leader's fishing expedition. Now, we could keep reading this, and I would encourage you to go and continue to read this for yourself, but I want to get to some of the statements that Kavenaugh made, as this was, after all, his Supreme Court confirmation hearing. During the hearing, Kavenaugh vowed to be a neutral and impartial arbiter if confirmed to the Supreme Court. He said, if confirmed to the Supreme Court, I will keep an open mind in every case. I will do equal right to the poor and to the rich. I will always strive to preserve the Constitution of the United States and the American rule of law. Kavenaugh was introduced by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman, and Attorney Lisa Blatt. In opening remarks Tuesday, Democrats sounded the alarm about Kavanaugh's past work in Republican politics, including as a lawyer in George Bush's White House. Kavenaugh said, I don't decide cases based on personal policy preferences. And then we get into the rest of the story that we've been talking about. So Kavenaugh is saying the right things. He's saying that, he's going to decide cases based on constitutionality. He's saying that he's not going to inject his own personal politics into cases that he presides over. This is what we want Supreme Court justices to do. But if I'm not mistaken, this is what every single Supreme Court nominee says when they make it to their confirmation hearing. So it is important to examine their record and their previous statements that they've made. And when you examine Kavanaugh's record, what you see is what was called by a man, and I don't remember his name, John Stossel, a libertarian stalwart, said did a recent video about Kavenaugh and what kind of Supreme Court justice he was going to be, and he spoke to another libertarian commentator from Reason TV about Kavenaugh, and this commentator said that libertarians will be happy with Kavenaugh. He defers to the federal government on matters of foreign policy and national security. But on all other matters, he is a constitutional conservative. He is a constitutional constructionist, and he's going to be a fantastic Supreme Court justice for liberty. The other story that I wanted to at least mention in today's video was this story from The Atlantic. I'm not going to bother with reading the whole thing. It's incredibly long. I will tell you, if you want a glimpse into the mind of F. Chuck Todd from over at MSNBC, then feel free to read this column. It seems to me like that Chuck Todd is either incompetent or totally oblivious to the work that other individuals in the media are doing and that the mainstream media at large has been doing. Or he's lying to all of our faces. And, I've been one to attribute malice where it might not have been just to do so. So I'm going to give Chuck Todd the benefit of the doubt in this case and say that he's just totally oblivious. He is, He's totally unaware of the actions that other media members have been involved in, and just totally unaware of the incompetent boob that he looks like as he pens this column. In this column, Chuck Todd claims that the campaign against the mainstream media was started by Roger Ailes, and that Roger Ailes decided that he's going to blame the media for presenting only one point of view, and he's going to lump everything that the media does that he disagrees with under bias, and that Roger Ailes started the Fox News Network, and the Fox News Network is an affront to journalism. He talks about Rush Limbaugh a lot. Apparently, Rush Limbaugh lives rent-free in Chuck Todd's head because he mentions him 4 or 5 times. I guess that means Roger Ailes is living rent-free, even dead, in Chuck Todd's head. But he talks a lot about Fox News, about Roger Ailes. He talks about, he says over and over again, most journalists are doing this, or most journalists are doing that. Most journalists want the truth, and yada, yada, yada. What Chuck Todd doesn't seem to realize is that while he's pinning all this stuff about the media being unbiased, and about the media being balanced, and about the media talking about the facts, and about them talking about things that interest them, he's ignoring a lot of what the media has been doing in recent days, where they have totally taken off the mask of objectivism and the seeking of truth. The mask that Chuck Todd is presenting to you in this column is the mask that the media was wearing up at least from the time up to the Reagan presidency, immediately after the Reagan presidency, until the Bush presidency, and then afterwards they just took it off. They didn't wear the mask at all during the Reagan presidency. They haven't worn the mask since after Obama was inaugurated into office. Just totally ignoring those things. So that's why I think it's one of the most oblivious pieces that I've ever read coming from a media member. But I encourage you to read it if you want to look into the mind of somebody so totally caught up with the mask, the image of the media that was worn in the past. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Hit subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss future videos. Don't forget to check back every weekday for new reports, because you never know what's going on with YouTube and their algorithm shenanigans. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope that you'll come back and join me next time. Until then, good night and God bless.